feeders, and I'm demonstrating a way to use Photoshop and select a sky that is pretty low contrast and difficult to separate from the foreground, which occurs a lot in winter scenes in the mountains during the day. Uh, Distance and haze can reduce this difference and makes it difficult if you want to process the sky differently, replace the sky, uh, however you choose to edit the photo. So I'm going to show some possible techniques that will work in that situation. And I would use different techniques if the sky is, blue sky in a situation like this with high contrast. So this is a low contrast scene, and we want to be able to select the sky now. Photoshop has some built-in selection tools in the select menu. You could try a color range, and sometimes you can pick, say, highlights and see if there's a way to find something much different. But usually what happens is it's pretty hard to get a good clean mask if you do that. If we duplicate this, you can see that when I take the mask out, there's quite a bit of areas that were not selected. So that's not going to work. We can try to select the focus area, see how that works. And sometimes you have something that's very focused and you see it gets really quite a bit of it. And that might work as a starting point with something like this. You could try to adjust and fine tune this a little bit, see if it gets any more. But again, you're left with not a real simple, clean cut. That's not totally to rule that one out, but we'll look at something else. We have subject. You could try the subject, see how that works, and you can see right away from the marching ants that that's not a good place to even start. We have the selection tools over here. We have quick object, or the object selection tool, quick selection tool, magic wand tool. The magic wand tool works really well when you have like just a little place that you want to select, or something like that, and you can kind of get a particular area that you want to deal with, and that can be handy for stuff like that, but not probably for a sky like this. You would do a lot of clicking to try to get it all, and then you actually, I don't particularly dislike what I'm seeing here. Once you get down close, it doesn't work. So then and then when you try to undo something, you're usually back at the start. It's not suited for this. The quick selection tool kind of uses the similarities within the circle, size of your circle. If there's a lot of contrast, you can make this really large. If there's not very much contrast, you're going to find that it's picking up pixels that are also in your foreground. But even making it smaller, there's just enough similarities here in these tonalities and the clouds that it's going to pick that up too. And it's hard to fine tune this one, so this big an area. So I would rule that out. Let's try object selection. And we can say, well, let's just see what happens if we grab the foreground. And again, we have some challenges in getting a very clean selection. Sometimes for a scene like this, the first thing I'll do is on my duplicate layer, I'll change it to multiply, and that's got a pretty good difference in terms of it's going to brighten areas that are above 50% gray and darken what would be below 50% gray if this were converted to black and white. You could duplicate it and get another step if you wanted, but again, I don't think there's probably enough. Well, that's actually not too bad. So just right there, you're getting a lot closer. You could probably go ahead and add a lot of this back in with the object selection. And that would get you a lot closer. And then you could just nudge everything with the quick selection, get real small and zoom in. And you could probably get nudge this up into those areas where it's not quite happening. So that, I like that. That's possibly a way to do this. You can fine tune this image a little bit more. I'll show you one other step that, depending on how much contrast you get with the multiply, you can also add one more layer, and that's, I'm being real, this is just for, I don't even consider this the best selection for what we're going to do, but, oops, I had the plus sign instead of the minus. But those are possibilities to use there, and you could just, create your mask. You can see how it's selecting right away, but it needs some fine tuning, and it wouldn't be great for if you want to do a sky replacement per se. Let's try one other thing. So deselect all my selections. So I made this multiply layer, and I've multiplied it again. And what happens if I change this to linear light? Linear light makes a very high contrast edge here. And so I've got the multiply layer. I duplicated that multiply layer, and then I just changed it to linear light. And I could, maybe lower that a little bit to get a good edge without too much highlighting. And now let's see if I stamp this layer and pick the quick object and select through this layer about like this. It's going to find it's really not much better in this particular image than what we did before. So it may not have been really worth that effort. But it does seem to make it pretty easy then to fine tune your selection here. And there's this little bit here that it's not, that is added to the mask that I don't want. So in here I would just fine tune this by coming up here and hold the Option key to subtract it. And just kind of come around here and like that. And now I have a little bit better of a selection. I kind of like all of this. Fine tune all that area in there. Just a little touch along this ridge here where the cornices of the snow are showing up. And it's looking a lot better. So then what I would do is I would make a mask. Select that mask, white, brush, 100% everything, and then I would just paint across my image to get everything else selected and masked with that. So then I would have a really good mask to protect or deselect the foreground. And I can double check it by option clicking on make sure nothing is disappearing that shouldn't. That's pretty good. Okay, so once we have that mask selected, we could apply this mask to any layer. So I can come down here and grab this layer and bring it back up here and turn off my darken, multiply, and I'm back to where I started. And I can now select this, and I have a good selection. I can Command-Shift-I to invert it, and now I've selected the sky. I can change my feathering of that selection. I can modify it, expand, contract, which comes in very handy for then adding a sky layer. So if I add this sky here into this, hold down Shift to center it in the area, I can drop the opacity and kind of see, where it's falling and see if I like it, somewhere up in here or, kind of what I want. I kind of like kind of like it about like this in here. And just to keep it simple, a lot of times, since that's really all I want, I will mask this layer with just a simple mask to make sure I don't end up with any of that um, affecting my foreground, if I do any kind of blend dip, things like that. So now I'll just pull this back up here, pull my mask that I liked up here, and it's going to have some edges here that I won't like and that are too obvious that something is, it looks like it was cut out. And so what I'll do is I'll select this mask again, and this time I will adjust it. I'll select, I'll modify it by contracting it, maybe by 10, and then I'll um, modify it and feather it, maybe by 20, and then add it. And now I'll take this and feather my, if you go way up, it'll soften it quite a bit into the, like the atmosphere. So you're getting some atmosphere over the mountains, and you can bring this down a little bit to soften the actual effect over the sky behind, because we do have a sky. There's a sky here. So we haven't removed the sky, we're just blending this sky into that sky, which tends to work a little better with fine-tuning things. And I kind of like that. Okay, so now I have this. This kind of becomes my base, my base system, my base image. So it's still that hazy image. It's the sky is, part of the image. It has, some integrity to the. It feels like it's actually the atmosphere of those mountains. Those mountains would be in the atmosphere. They wouldn't be in front of the sky. They'd be in the sky. So that gets me a lot closer. And then I can bring up, I can use my normal editing system here. So I might, want to just do a slight sunset amplifier, and then bring in some gradients, maybe something like this, and take no darks, take it down to about, something like that. And then I might, for this down here, add some contrast. That's good. So this one here kind of darkens, brings in this area, brings it forward a little bit, still leaves the back. I could maybe make it only the darks, and that really helps reduce some of the contrast in a natural way, because these are darker than these, and that makes sense. This should be receding. And then I might want a little alpenglow on here, so I can put something like this in and make it only the lights, and that kind of brightens up the snow, but pulls it in. And I haven't even done anything with contrasts and such, so I could stamp this layer and then just maybe come into my camera raw filter, and I've got a pretty good image. It's almost like a JPEG out of camera, and you could do your auto and see, maybe apply one of your filters, maybe might, depending on how you want to apply it. I kind of like my night sky filters. I might want to darken this part down and just reduce this in the sky, so I could I could use this for my profile and then bring saturation down quite a bit. And there we go. So now we've got really a much more, I think, a believable type of scene. Now it looks like the sun is hitting some spots here, so some actually some dodging and burning, or what you can do is, I'll duplicate this, is image, apply image, and you multiply. That makes everything darker. Now I've set a mask. I'm going to deselect this, select this mask, image, apply image. I'm going to invert that multiply so that it's basically only applying, it's making the lighter areas get a bigger impact. Turn that on, and now it's looking much more like a night, and then I can use my blend if to say no dark. And now what we've done is we have taken down the brighter areas. It could be moonlight, it's just the glow from the late evening, and it's not quite so obvious. So those are some of the things, and then if you really wanted to tone that down a little bit, what you might want to do, you could take your brush and maybe I would use a soft brush. I grabbed the brush I had, which is hard, but let's change that. Okay, now yeah. A lot of times the sky should be a little lighter as you get down into the horizon areas under here. The sun is flipping off the mountains into the clouds. So that's kind of how I would do it. I hope that helps and gives you some ideas with these low contrast scenes like this on how to select the sky so you can edit it differently. If we go back to my original here, see how much lower that was. One of the things, if you notice how the sky here, what if we had reversed that mask? Now you can see now the sky, actually there was more there than we maybe had realized when we first started. And so that's something that sometimes you'll find that you actually do have some information in the sky if you use the multiply layer and the linear light to increase the definition within the clouds. But you'll have to be careful of blowing out areas and things. So it works in some situations, but not in every situation. So so here we go. That is if you really wanted to modify it a little bit, you could just bring your original sky back in and just try some blending there. But anyway, I hope that helps.